Hey, so this is part 4 of my series on the history of Yousician. I finished up last video when Yousician had added ukulele and piano mode, and I had eagerly gobbled up piano mode until I hit that brick wall where the songs were just too difficult, too fast. So I quit Yousician to play out of books instead. The next two changes to Yousician were the addition of bass and the addition of sheet music mode for guitar. I'm not sure which one came first. When bass mode came out, my personal reaction was to feel it was such a waste, because at that time I was patiently waiting for the drum set mode to come out, because I started learning drums back in the later part of 2015. At that point I had I had no interest in learning bass, though I did realize, just like with ukulele, I did realize how much sense it makes for them to add an instrument that, though it may be less popular than drums, it'd be much easier to incorporate from a technical standpoint, from a financial standpoint, certainly. The tablature is going to look the same, the gaming mechanics are going to look the same. All they have to add, for the most part, is new educational videos. But what did grab my attention when it came out was sheet music mode, which came out somewhere around the same time. Like I said, for myself, I had become a little bit disillusioned with the usefulness of tablature. I wanted to be able to play melodies, and especially chord melody combinations on guitar, which I was familiar with and loved on the piano. More than anything, I wanted to learn to improvise melodies on my own. And all those hours of Yousician guitar didn't get me one half shuffling footstep closer to that goal, because I was tied to this meaningless tablature. I found myself maddeningly frustrated by looking at a line of side-scrolling tab and playing the notes correctly and having no stinking clue what on earth they meant or how to create my own. But when sheet music mode came out, I thought to myself, I may just return to Yousician once again. And so I went and reset my guitar profile and started over in sheet music mode. The downside for sheet music mode, and this is a downside that still persists, is that the guitar curriculum isn't designed for learning to read sheet music. So if you can already read sheet music, then it'll be great for you. But if you're just beginning to learn to read sheet music for guitar, it'll be sometimes a great experience and sometimes not so great, particularly once you get out of first position and start to move up the neck a little. So just like with piano, I eventually hit a wall because I wasn't doing a lot outside Yousician with guitar sheet music, especially in those higher positions. And this is still kind of an issue with Yousician. The sheet music function is available for all the instruments, guitar, ukulele, bass, and piano. And for myself, it's the only feature I use. But for beginners, there's no actual sheet music path, meaning that you'll need to learn the note values away from Yousician on your own. And especially you'll need to learn to play in the different positions on the guitar. You need to learn that away from Yousician on your own. So for example, there might be, so to speak, let's say there's a lesson 11. Let's say there's lesson 11 and lesson 12. And let's say in lesson 11, you can play all these familiar notes in first position on guitar. And then in lesson 12, they give you similar kinds of finger movements 3 or 4 frets higher. So you just move a little bit and you play almost the same thing. And in tab, that just means that you shift your fingers and read the numbers a little higher. But in sheet music, it means you're lost at sea, because it's completely new content. Now what's interesting is that in my personal story, Yousician actually helped me here too. Because once I hit that brick wall, I realized that I wanted to get past that brick wall. And so over a decently long period, I used books to teach myself to play guitar melodies in any position. And now I can play in 5th position just about as easily as I can in 1st position. So now I'm going through Yousician again after resetting my game progress several months ago. I'm going through it again using sheet music mode and playing primarily in 5th position. So I taught myself to play in 1st, 4th, 5th, 7th, and 9th. 5th is definitely the most comfortable. 1st position is comfortable, but the problem is you got to deal with string muting, which is a pain. So 5th I'm actually probably more comfortable in 5th, depending on the melody. Anyway, once again, all that thanks to Yousician. So at this point, Yousician offered guitar, ukulele, piano and bass. And apparently, by the way, ukulele is actually pronounced ukulele, but nobody says that. It sounds funny, so I'm going to keep saying ukulele. Now there was one more instrument that would be added before we come to the present time. It wasn't the one I expected it to be. At this point, I'm pretty sure, let's say it's 2017 or 2018. I'm not completely sure about that date. Like I said, I couldn't find info online about the progress of development, so this is all based on my memory. But whenever it was, I was pretty enthused with Yousician. I was regularly using it, and I was hoping for Yousician for drums to come out. Pretty soon I found myself on the official feedback forum, which I was surprised to learn actually takes suggestions for features to add, and then arranges those suggestions in order of how many votes they get from users. I was surprised to find that the #1 voted for option was Yousician for violin. Now, at the time I had very little interest in violin, so I merely took note of this as an interesting oddity. I thought maybe the reason for the votes was because violin is such a sheet music-oriented instrument, being in the orchestral family. I thought maybe drummers are less likely to want a sight-reading game because they're more interested in jamming out to jam tracks. After all, while there were contributors who nominated and voted for a drum set mode, or an E-drums mode, because obviously you can imagine how there could be technical difficulties with acoustically listening to drums with a phone, let's say. But E-drums wouldn't have that problem. But anyway, there were people who nominated and voted for that, but it was extremely low in the request pool. Whereas violin had it was the top. It was literally the top of what people were voting for. So I was expecting, I'm sure a lot of people were expecting, a long pause and then the release of Yousician for violin. Instead, what happened was a short pause and then the release of Yousician for voice, which seemed a bit out of the blue and odd, to me at least. And in terms of functionality, it's basically a glorified mashup of a karaoke app with some beginner vocal instruction videos. The curriculum ends after 5 levels, which takes no time at all to finish if you have any vocal experience. And there's nothing remotely like a sheet music mode, just these kind of arbitrary scrolling lines on a screen, which you have to guess in your mind what a half step and a whole step is. So what kind of a logical step would this have been from a marketing or a internet perspective? You could say perhaps this was the perfect step to expand their audience. It was unexpected for me, certainly, but perhaps it was the logical step to expand their audience, because now it's expanded to include those who don't have that dusty ukulele sitting in their little brother's bedroom. You've expanded the audience to an even greater number of people, which is those people who aren't musicians at all, but still like the idea of a fun little music game app. So this allows Yousician to step into not just the guitar learning apps market, but also into the karaoke apps market. While the developers haven't added anything to that short 5-stage curriculum, they haven't added anything since they started 5 years ago. The focus instead seems to be on adding popular songs for subscription users. So there's no additional curriculum levels, but there are popular songs that you can play independently if you're in subscription mode. So it seems like the singing mode is not so much an educational tool like the other modes are, but instead it serves more as trying to be the leading karaoke app in the App Store. That's my guess anyway, because there's still no sheet music mode, and it doesn't seem to do a whole lot in a lot of ways. Now, with 5 instruments, guitar, ukulele, piano, bass, and voice, the app was pretty close to what we have today. There were still some changes to come. I'll be talking about some of those in the next videos, as well as commenting on some of Yousician's current competition and alternatives.